This is Richard Wolff speaking to our Patreon community and responding to another Ask Prof. Wolff question. Actually, I'm responding to literally dozens of the same question or slight variations. So let me try to respond to all of you without listing all your names. And indeed, it's a question that comes all the time. And it reflects not that you don't know, but that our schooling system and our educational system have failed to provide information that you are interested in, that is important to you, and that should have been made understandable as it easily can be. The question has to do with money, and in particular with the quantity of money in circulation. Everybody knows that money makes the world go around, or at least it's one of those things that makes the world go around. And any economy that uses money, as all modern economies do, is going to be shaped and affected by how much money there is. Is it plentiful? Is it scarce? Is it hard to come by? And so on. Everybody has understood this for a long time. For a while in capitalist economies, it was allowed for private banks and others to literally print and enter into circulation money. You might call that a private money system. That immediately became such an occasion for crime, misrepresentation, one inefficiency after another, that virtually all capitalist systems outlawed private money and made the issuance of money, literally printing the bills, minting the coins, etc., a governmental monopoly. In most countries, there's something called the bank of that country's name, and they're in charge of the control of the amount of money in circulation and the terms upon which you can get it. We would have called it the Bank of the United States, but the history of the first effort at such a bank was so corrupted that we gave up that name, and it took us until 1913 to pass the law creating the National Bank of the United States. So instead of having a name like the Bank of England or the Bank of France, etc., it's called the Federal Reserve System. They're in charge of money. And by that is mainly meant how much money is in circulation and what are the terms of borrowing it, the interest rates. Are they the only ones who can issue money? Technically, legal money, yes. But banks, when they give you checking accounts, are also in a position of creating money, particularly its modern form, which is now electronic, not just pieces of paper and pieces of metal, but the electronic version of money. But the Federal Reserve is still a major player in shaping the quantity of money and the interest rate on which you can borrow. Okay, so here's the system. The Federal Reserve, and this is the answer to the question so many of you have, the Federal Reserve is basically free to create or to destroy as much money as it thinks the economy needs. That's right. There's really no physical limit. There are some constraints. They can't lose too much money because the Treasury would have to make up their losses, and so there's a bit of a constraint there. But it doesn't operate most of the time because it's very, very minimal. The Federal Reserve, let me stress it again, basically has the right to increase the money supply as it sees fit, which is why, for example, in recent weeks and months, as the looming collapse of capitalism one more time, it's the third time in the 21st century, let's remember, the dot-com crash early in 2000, the subprime mortgage crash in 2008 and 9, and now the coronavirus crash. Notice that the name in each case is something particular that happens at that moment. But of course, if you're thoughtful, you'll understand there's the same economic system falling apart every few years. When I explain to you also that that's been going on throughout the history of capitalism, you will understand that this is a system that is highly unstable, highly vulnerable, and it is regularly collapsing. That's more a problem of the system than whatever the latest particular trigger is that sets it off. So the Federal Reserve comes in when the capitalist system crashes, as it has so often, and floods the economy with money in the hopes that making money easily available will lead people to spend when the economic situation was making them not spend. So, for example, in the subprime mortgage crisis back in 2008 and 9, banks were unwilling to lend money to each other because they had gotten involved in a mortgage system that was falling apart. So the federal government came in through the Federal Reserve and spent money like a drunken sailor in order to compensate for the failure of the private sector to move money around in the normal way. This time it's the virus, the coronavirus, collapsing the economy. Nobody is going to restaurants. Businesses are shutting down, sending their workers home. You all know what's going on. The economy disintegrates, and the Federal Reserve comes in and creates trillions with a T, trying to keep this collapsing capitalism yet again from fundamentally dissolving, which is the risk here as it has been in the past. They lower the interest rates to make it easy for banks and others to come and borrow all the free new money that the Federal Reserve is creating. That's how it works, folks. No mystery, no complication. Will it work? The answer is always yes and no. Some spending will happen that wouldn't have happened otherwise, no doubt. But where all that money goes, well, let me give you an example. Between 2008 and 9, the subprime mortgage crash, and 2020, the virus crash, most of the money, and an enormous amount of money, was produced and inserted into the economy by the Federal Reserve. Most of it went to the stock market. It didn't go to you and me. It didn't produce rising real incomes for us because it didn't happen. It went into the stock market where the money bid up the prices of stocks so that the tiny number of people who have a significant amount of stocks, let me remind you, top 10% of our people own 80% of our stocks. They've had a wonderful 10 years. You and I, not so much. That's because this way of dealing with capitalism only reinforces its inequalities and its over-reliance on debt. Ironically, the solution, in quotations, to the crash of 2008 and 9, fomented in part by the Federal Reserve money creation, of course set up the over-indebted vulnerability of the U.S. capitalist systems to the latest virus, hence our situation now. It is not a good solution, but it is one of the few that capitalism considers, since it cannot and will not change its basic structure, which is the problem. This is Richard Wolff for Democracy at Work and our Patreon community.